"Move him," the aide said, pointing at my finest sentry as though he were a hat stand left in the wrong place. "His Excellency does not walk around furniture." I had been the officer of the doorway for 11 years, and in all that time no one had ever called Corporal Wren furniture. I came down the inner steps at the measured pace my rank required, because a measured pace tells a nervous man more than a shout ever could, and I stopped one stride from the visitor's aide, who wore a foreign cut of black coat and the kind of smile that has never once been refused. "Good evening," I said. "I am the officer of the threshold. The sovereign's door does not move, and neither does the man who keeps it." The aide's smile did not falter, but something behind it recalculated. Behind me, under the carved stone arch that has framed the king's own entrance for 200 years of this fictional house, Corporal Wren stood as he always stood, chin level, eyes forward, white gloves at the seam of his trousers, the bearskin throwing a long shadow across the threshold stone. He had not heard a word, or he had heard every word and decided correctly that none of them were his to answer. That was my job. The sentry holds the door. The officer holds the argument. What the aide did not know, what I am going to tell you, because you were not there and the cameras were turned the wrong way that night, is that the sovereign's door is not a door. It is a law. There is an order of precedence carved into the very stone of that threshold, older than any of us, and it decides who passes, in what sequence, and who waits. Break it, and you have not been rude. You have unmade 200 years. The aide gestured again, more sharply. You misunderstand. His Excellency arrives in 8 minutes. The sovereign's own entrance is the only one suited to a man of his standing. Your soldier will stand at the secondary arch tonight. I have cleared it. With whom? I asked. He blinked. I beg your pardon. You said you have cleared it. With whom did you clear the moving of the sovereign's sentry off the sovereign's threshold? The pause that followed was the first honest thing he had given me all evening. He had not cleared it with anyone. He had simply decided, in the way that powerful men's people decide things, that the world would rearrange itself around the convenience of the man he served, and that a guardsman in a red tunic was the softest part of that world to push. I have learned to read these men in the first 10 seconds, the way a farrier reads a horse before he ever lifts a hoof. This one believed the door belonged to whoever wanted it most. He was about to learn that it belongs to no one, that it has a keeper, and a sequence, and a memory longer than his patience. There is a thing I tell every young guardsman about the sovereign's door, on his first night holding it, and I will tell it to you, because it is the whole reason I did not give the aide his way. The order of precedence on that threshold has been broken exactly twice in 200 years. Once for a queen who came home in a coffin, and the household carried her through her own door though she was past walking through any. And once, long before my time, for a frightened envoy fleeing a war, whom the sovereign of the day brought through personally, with his own hand on the man's shoulder, because mercy outranks ceremony when a king says it does. Twice. Both times the door was opened by the highest authority in the realm, for a reason the whole house would have died defending. Not once, in 200 years, has it been opened because a guest found the proper arch beneath him. That is the difference the aide could not see. The door bends only for the sacred, and never for the vain, and a man who cannot tell which one he is asking on behalf of has already told you everything. His Excellency is a guest of this house, I said. Guests of this house enter by the companion's arch, where they are received with full honor. The sovereign's door is reserved for the sovereign, and for those the sovereign personally brings through it. That is not my rule. It is the rule that makes the door mean anything at all. His Excellency, the aide said, and now the smile was gone entirely, represents a head of state. He will not be received through a side arch like a tradesman. The companion's arch is not a side arch. It is the arch through which 3 generations of honored visitors have passed. It is more than grand enough for any guest alive. What it is not is the sovereign's own threshold, and tonight, neither are you. Behind me, Wren had not moved a muscle, but I knew, the way you know the men you have trained for years, that he had filed every word. He would stand on that stone until the building came down around him before he stepped aside for a stranger's convenience, and he would do it without a flicker, because that is what the post is. The hardest order a guardsman ever keeps is the order to do nothing while a man rages an arm's length from his face. People think the discipline is in the marching. It is not. It is in the standing. The aide drew himself up. I will speak to your superior. I am the officer of the threshold, I said again gently, because the gentleness costs them more than anger ever could. On this stone tonight, I am the superior you wish to find. Above me is the controller of the household, and above the controller is the sovereign. If you wish to move the sovereign's sentry off the sovereign's door, the request goes up that chain, not down it, and not sideways into a corporal who is forbidden to answer you. Shall I send word to the controller that His Excellency's aide requests the suspension of the order of precedence? It was a small thing, the way his eyes moved then, a flick toward the great lit windows of the house, where the controller and the night's hosts were even now waiting to receive his master with every courtesy the realm could offer. He had imagined this as a quiet adjustment. A word, a soldier shuffled aside, his master gliding through the grandest door without ever knowing a thing had been argued. He had not imagined it becoming a question put, formally, to the most senior official in the building, a question whose only honest answer was no. That will not be necessary, he said. Then we understand each other, I said. His Excellency will be received at the companion's arch with honor. My sentry remains. He should have stopped there. Wiser men would have. But there is a particular kind of pride that cannot bear to lose to a man in a red coat who has not once raised his voice, and the aide had it in full. He stepped past me, not toward the companion's arch, but toward Wren, toward the threshold itself, the way a man tests a fence he has been told not to climb. Corporal, he said, close to Wren's face now, you will stand down. I am giving you a direct order on behalf of His Excellency. Step aside. Wren did not move. He did not blink. The bearskin did not so much as shiver. His eyes stayed level on the dark of the forecourt beyond, where the visitor's motorcade would arrive in. I checked the great clock through the window, 6 minutes now. To the aide it must have looked like insolence, or stupidity, or some trained animal refusal to comprehend. It was none of those. It was the deepest obedience there is, obedience to the law of the door over the loudest voice in front of it. He cannot take an order from you, I said quietly, stepping between them again. Not because he will not, because he is forbidden to. A sentry on the sovereign's threshold answers to the sovereign's chain of command, and to no one else, not to a guest, not to a guest's man, not to me beyond the post I am given. If a stranger could move him with a word, the door would mean nothing, and the law would be whoever shouted last. You are asking him to commit the one offense his whole oath exists to prevent. He will not do it. I will not let him. For a moment I thought the man might actually lay hands on him. His jaw worked. His shoulders squared. And then, from the lit doorway of the house above us, a calm voice that I knew better than my own heartbeat said, "Is there a difficulty at the threshold?" The controller of the household had come down to see what was keeping the evening's most important guest from arriving smoothly. And the aide, who had wanted so badly to keep this small and quiet, had just been handed the exact thing he had been trying to avoid. A witness, senior to me, standing in the sovereign's own light, asking what the difficulty was. The aide turned to the controller the way a drowning man turns to a rope, and made his first real mistake of the night. He smiled again. "Controller, thank you. A small matter of arrangements. His Excellency will of course be received at the sovereign's entrance, as befits his standing. Your officer here seems unaware of the protocol. If you would simply instruct the corporal to clear the threshold, we can avoid any awkwardness in front of His Excellency." I watched the controller's face and saw nothing move on it, which told me everything. The controller of the household is a man who has spent 40 years guarding the difference between honor and convenience, and he can hear the second one trying to wear the clothes of the first from across a courtyard. "You have it the wrong way around," the controller said, in the mild tone he uses precisely when he is about to give no ground at all. "It is not my officer who is unaware of the protocol. The protocol is the order of precedence, and the order of precedence reserves the sovereign's threshold for the sovereign. There is no awkwardness in receiving His Excellency at the companion's arch. There would be considerable awkwardness in His Excellency entering through a door that announces him as something he is not. He is the personal representative of a head of state," the aide said, and his voice had begun to climb. "At home, he passes through any door he chooses." "Then I am glad we have helped him understand he is no longer at home," the controller said. "He is a guest of this house, and our house honors its guests by the rules that make the honor worth having. I will go further. The sovereign himself does not move his sentries from the threshold for his own convenience. He certainly will not be told that a visitor's aide moved them for his." 4 minutes. I could hear it now under the wind, the low approach of the motorcade beyond the gates, the change in the night air that 100 receptions teaches you to feel before you hear. The aide heard it too, and I watched the calculation race behind his eyes. His master was about to arrive. The thing he had promised to arrange, the grand entrance through the great door, was not arranged. And the only way left to him was to make it happen by force of presence in the next 4 minutes, in front of the most senior man in the building, against a corporal who would sooner be carried off the stone than walk off it. He chose, as proud men in a corner always do, to double down. "This is an insult to His Excellency," he said, loudly enough now that 2 footmen at the companion's arch turned their heads. "And I will see that it is reported. Names will be taken. Your corporal will be reassigned by morning. You," he turned the finger on me, "will answer for humiliating a state guest over a doorway." It is a strange thing to be threatened with the end of your career while standing on the most secure ground of your life. I had been the officer of the threshold for 11 years. I had stood that post in the rain that froze on the bearskins, in the heat that wilted the footmen, through a state funeral and 2 Korans vigils, and one night I will not speak of. I knew exactly what the door was worth, and exactly what my name was worth if I let it be moved. The two were the same thing. "Report whatever you wish," I said. "Take every name. Mine is the officer of the threshold, and you may add that I would give it up tonight before I would give up the door. But understand what you would be reporting. You would be reporting that a guest's aide attempted to suspend the order of precedence of this house, was refused by the household at every level, and intends to retaliate against the soldier who stood his lawful post. I do not think that report reads the way you imagine it does." The aide's mouth opened. Whatever he meant to say was swallowed by the sound that had been growing under all of it, the motorcade, sweeping now through the outer gates, headlamps washing white across the cobblestones of the forecourt, the long polished cars slowing toward the threshold. His Excellency had arrived, and the question of which door he would enter by was about to stop being a quarrel and become a fact, witnessed by everyone present in the next 60 seconds. The controller did something then that I have thought about many times since. He did not raise his voice or his hand. He simply turned, walked the few measured steps to the companion's arch, and took up the receiving position there himself, the senior official of the household, standing in person at the arch where the guest would be honored. It was not a retreat. It was the opposite. He had moved the center of gravity of the entire evening to the correct door, and by standing at it himself, he had made entering anywhere else not a triumph but a snub, a guest refusing the most senior man in the house, who waited to receive him with full ceremony. The aide saw it. He understood too late what had been done to his plan without a single raised voice. If His Excellency now strode to the sovereign's door, he would be walking past the controller of the household, who stood waiting to receive him with honor at the proper arch. And every footman, every guard, Every member of the household staff would witness the guest of the evening publicly slighting his host's most senior officer over a matter of vanity. The grand entrance the aide had promised would not read as grandeur. It would read as a tantrum. The first car door opened. A protocol officer of the visiting delegation stepped out first, and this one, I saw at once, was a different animal from the aide. An older man, gray at the temple, with the unhurried eyes of someone who has spent his life precisely on the seam between two proud houses and knows exactly how thin the ice is. He took in the scene in one sweep. The controller at the companion's arch, the aide flushed and stranded near the sovereign's threshold, my corporal immovable on the stone, and me between them. And I watched a man who understood the order of precedence in his bones realize, in half a second, that his colleague had nearly walked their principal into a disaster. "There has been a misunderstanding," the protocol officer said smoothly, crossing the cobbles toward the controller and ignoring the aide entirely. "His Excellency is most honored to be received at the companion's arch. It would be our privilege." And there it was, the rope the aide had been reaching for, taken out of his hands by the one man on his own side who actually understood the door. I should tell you what was happening around us while the two delegations sorted themselves out, because this is the part the aide never saw and never would have believed. The household had begun, without a word from anyone, to close around the threshold. It is a quiet thing the way a disciplined house answers a threat to one of its own. No alarm sounds, no one runs. But I had felt the courtyard change the moment the aide first laid his hand on Wren's chest, the way a regiment feels it when one man is touched. The two footmen at the companion's arch had drawn a half-step nearer, not toward the aide. That would have been a confrontation, and we do not confront. We simply are present, but toward the threshold, so that anyone looking would see that the corporal was not alone on his stone. The captain of the watch had appeared at the inner door, unhurried, hands clasped behind him, watching. He had not been summoned, but a sergeant of the gatehouse had sent him word the instant the voices rose, because that is what the gatehouse is for. A senior page stood at the controller's shoulder with the receiving list ready, having quietly struck the sovereign's door from the night's arrangements before the aide could insist on it again. None of them had spoken. None of them had needed to. They had simply, each in his place, made it impossible for the threshold to be moved without the whole house moving with it, and a whole house does not move for a stranger's convenience. That is what an order of precedence is in the end. People hear the phrase and think of snobbery, of which fork and which seat. It is nothing of the kind. It is the agreement, written into stone and bone over 200 years, that no single loud man in a single loud moment can rearrange what the house is. The aide had come expecting to push one soldier off one stone. He had not understood that the soldier was the visible edge of something far larger and far stiller, that behind Wren stood the footmen, and behind them the captain, and behind him the controller, and behind him the whole long memory of the door itself. You do not move that by leaning on a corporal. You would have to move the house, and the house had quietly decided, in the space of 90 seconds and without a single raised voice, that it would not be moved. But His Excellency had not yet stepped out of the car. The aide still had 30 seconds and a mouth full of pride, and I could see him deciding whether to accept the graceful exit his colleague had just built him, or to make one last, ruinous attempt to win the argument he had already lost on the only ground that mattered, the stone under Corporal Wren's boots. He chose the stone. He stepped back to the threshold, put his hand flat against Corporal Wren's chest, against the brass buttons, against the red wool, against the post itself, and pushed. Not hard, not a blow, a test, a shove of entitlement, the kind of touch a man uses on a turnstile he expects to give way. "Move," he said, low and fast, so the protocol officer would not hear. "His Excellency is getting out of the car. Move now or I will have you." Corporal Wren did not move. I want to be precise about what happened because everything that came after turns on it. Wren did not strike the hand away. He did not step back. He did not look down at the man or speak or so much as tighten his jaw. A hand had been laid on a sentry of the sovereign's threshold, and the sentry's entire training, his whole oath, narrowed to one law: hold the post, do not break, let the chain answer for you. He let the hand rest against the buttons it had no right to touch, and he stood exactly where 200 years of precedence had set him, and he did not give the man the reaction he had come for. The discipline was total. It was, I thought, the most eloquent thing in the courtyard. And it was witnessed. The protocol officer had turned at the word move. The controller saw it from the arch. 2 footmen saw it. And I learned this only later, the recording. Not the camera the aide had assumed was pointed away, but the household's own threshold record, which runs always, on every state night, precisely so that what happens at the sovereign's door can never become a matter of one man's word against another's. "Take your hand off my sentry," I said. I did not shout. I have found that the quietest sentence a man hears all evening is the one he remembers. The aide's hand came off the buttons as if the brass had turned hot. "You laid hands on a soldier holding the sovereign's threshold," I said, "in front of the controller of the household, in front of your own delegation. There is no version of this evening, now, in which that was the wise thing to do." And then the door of the great car opened the rest of the way, and His Excellency himself stepped out into the wash of the headlamps. I had expected, I will admit it, a larger version of the aide, a man swollen with the same entitlement, ready to be told his grand entrance was prepared, and to sail through the sovereign's door over the body of my corporal if need be. That is not who got out of the car. The man who stepped onto the cobblestones was older than I had thought, and tired in the particular way of men who have spent decades being the most important person in every room and have stopped finding it interesting. He had the stillness of real authority, the kind that has nothing left to prove. And his first act before anyone could speak was to look, not at the great lit door, not at the controller, but at the small frozen tableau at the threshold. His own aide flushed and caught, my corporal immovable, the brass buttons the aide's hand had just left. "What is happening here?" he said. It was not a question. It was a man who already knew the shape of the answer and was giving the people around him one chance to tell him the truth before he decided what he had seen. The aide spoke first, too fast. "Excellency, the household has been most difficult about the arrangements. I have been securing the sovereign's entrance for your arrival, as befits." "I did not ask what you secured," His Excellency said without raising his voice. "I asked what is happening. There is a soldier at that door who has not moved, and your hand was on his chest. Did you push a sentry of this house?" The silence in the courtyard was the kind you could have leaned against. The protocol officer's eyes closed for the briefest instant. The look of a man watching the disaster he had tried to head off arrive anyway, in slow motion, exactly where he had known it would. "Excellency," the aide tried. The man would not stand aside. He was insolent. He refused a direct. "He refused you," His Excellency said. "Of course he refused you. He is not yours to command." And then he did the thing that told me, finally, what kind of man I was dealing with. He turned away from his own aide entirely, faced my corporal, and looked at him with something that was almost respect. "You hold the sovereign's door," he said to Wren, "and you do not leave it for a guest, not even for me." Corporal Wren, forbidden to answer, did the only thing his oath permitted. He held his eyes level and let his stillness speak. It said yes. It said not even for you. It said this is what the door is for. His Excellency nodded slowly, as if a thing he had half forgotten had been returned to him. Then he turned to the controller, waiting at the companion's arch in the full dignity of his office, and his whole bearing changed. The tiredness fell away, and something older and finer took its place. "Controller," he said, and inclined his head, "forgive the disturbance at your threshold. I would be honored to be received at the companion's arch." He let a beat pass, and then, deliberately, loudly enough that every footman and guard and member of his own delegation would hear it carried across the cobbles. A house that will not move its own door for its own king is a house worth visiting. A house that would move it for me would not be. It is not often, in 11 years of holding that threshold, that I have wanted to applaud a visitor. I held still, of course. We all did. But I will tell you that something loosened in my chest, the way it does when a thing you have defended alone turns out to be understood after all by the one man you least expected to understand it. The controller bowed the deep, unhurried bow of a host to an honored guest, with not one trace of the argument that had just been won in it, and said, "His Excellency does this house great honor. Be welcome." And he turned and led the way under the companion's arch, where the lamps were warm and the carved stone rose grand enough for any guest in the world, and His Excellency walked through it at the controller's side as if it had been his intention all along. The aide was left standing at the sovereign's threshold, alone. He had imagined himself, I think, gliding in behind his master through the great door, the man who had arranged everything. Instead, he stood on the wrong stone, beside a corporal who would not look at him, while his principal walked through the correct arch on the arm of the household's most senior officer, and made a small speech that everyone present now understood had been aimed precisely at him. He had not been arrested. No hand had been laid on him. The household had done nothing to him at all. That was the genius of it. He had humbled himself, in front of everyone he most wanted to impress, and the only people who had so much as raised their voices were the proud and the foolish, and he had been both. The protocol officer crossed to him. I was near enough to hear, and the older man did not bother to lower his voice as far as the aide had earlier. He had clearly decided the lesson would land better in the open air. "You were told the order of precedence before we left," the protocol officer said. "It is in the briefing. It is in the briefing of every state visit this delegation has ever made. The sovereign's threshold is not entered by guests. You did not forget it. You decided it did not apply to you because no one here had a title that frightened you. And so you laid your hand on a soldier who could not strike back, in front of his entire chain of command and ours, and you have made His Excellency's arrival a story about you. Go to the cars. You will not be in the receiving line tonight." The aide opened his mouth. The protocol officer simply looked at him, and the look was a closed door, and the aide went to the cars. I watched him go across the cobbles, past the long, polished motorcade, into the dark at the edge of the forecourt where the drivers waited, and I felt not triumph. We do not deal in triumph at the threshold. I felt the quiet that comes when a thing that was leaning has been set straight again. The protocol officer turned to me then. Up close his eyes were not unkind. "Officer," he said, "on behalf of the delegation, I apologize for what was put on your corporal. He held a difficult post very well. Better than my colleague held an easy one." He glanced at Wren, who stood exactly as he had stood through all of it, eyes forward, gloves at the seam, the bearskin throwing its long shadow across the threshold stone. "Does he know," the officer asked, almost gently, "that a man of His Excellency's rank just told him he would not move the door even for him? Or is he forbidden to know anything at all out here?" "He heard it," I said. "He hears everything. He is forbidden to answer, not to understand. And he will carry that sentence, that the door does not move even for a king, back to the guardroom tonight, and the younger men will hear it from him, and it will be true 100 years after all of us are gone. You did him a greater honor than a medal. You confirmed the post." The officer considered that. "Your house is stricter than mine," he said. "My house is only as strict as the door," I said. "The door is what's strict, we just keep it." He inclined his head, the small bow of one professional to another, the bow that costs the giver nothing and means everything, and walked under the companion's arch after his principal, into the warm light and the music that had begun inside, leaving me alone with my corporal on the threshold and the long shadows of the emptying forecourt. I stepped back to my position. The motorcade idled, then pulled forward to the holding yard. The footmen returned to their stations. The night closed over the small storm as though it had never been, which is exactly how it is supposed to close, because the whole purpose of the order of precedence is that, when it is kept, nothing happens. No one is humiliated who did not insist upon it. No one is moved who should not move. The door simply means what it has always meant, and the evening goes on, and the only people who ever know how close it came are the ones who stood on the stone. But it was not quite over, because a household that quietly backs the right thing does not stop at the moment of the argument. It remembers. And what came in the days after, the way the house chose to record and reward and protect what my corporal had done, was the part that taught even me something new about the place I had served for 11 years. The aide kept one promise. By the next morning a complaint had gone up, not through his own protocol officer, who would never have signed it but rooted around him, to the office that handles correspondence from visiting delegations. It said that a guardsman had been insolent and obstructive to a state guest, that the officer of the threshold had been insubordinate, and that both should be disciplined and the corporal reassigned. It was, I am told, 3 pages long. It did not mention the hand on the buttons. I learned of it because the controller sent for me. I went up expecting, if I am honest, the beginning of a long and tiring defense of a thing I knew to be right, but that powerful men can grind down anyway, given paperwork and patience. I had drafted the words in my head on the stairs. I did not need them. The controller was at his desk with the 3 pages in front of him, and beside them, a single sheet I did not recognize. "Sit," he said. "You will want to hear how this ends because it ends well, and you spent 11 years assuming it never would." He turned the unfamiliar sheet toward me. It was a transcript, timed, exact, drawn from the household's threshold record. The camera the aide had been so sure was pointed the wrong way had been pointed, as it always is on a state night, precisely at the sovereign's door. It had the hand on the chest. It had the shove. It had the words "move now or I will have you." It had my corporal not moving, not striking, not so much as turning his head. It had all of it in the cold, neutral truth of a record that does not take sides because it does not need to. "The complaint says your corporal was obstructive," the controller said. "The record says your corporal stood his post while a guest's aide assaulted him and committed no offense whatsoever in return. The complaint says you were insubordinate. The record says you defended the order of precedence of this house against a man with no authority to suspend it, and that the most senior official present," he tapped his own chest once, without a flicker, "agreed with you on the stone, in front of everyone." I have replied to the delegation. My reply is 1 paragraph. It thanks them for their concern, encloses the relevant timings of the threshold record, and expresses the household's complete confidence in the conduct of its officer and its corporal. I am told the aide is no longer attached to the delegation. That is not our doing. That is the consequence of asking a record to lie for you when it will not. I sat with that for a moment. It is a strange relief to brace for a long defense and find the wall already built and manned before you arrived. "There is more," the controller said. "His Excellency, before he left the country, sent a private note, not to the press, not to be made public. To me, he read it aloud, and I will give it to you nearly word for word because I have it by heart now. Controller, in 40 years of state visits, I have been received at 100 grand doors by houses eager to flatter me. Yours is the first that refused to move its own door for me, and it is the only one I will remember. The soldier who would not step aside understood my office better than my own man did. Tell him, if you are permitted, that a king of another house salutes him. And keep your door exactly as strict as it was the night I came." The controller folded the note. "I am permitted," he said, "and I am telling you, tell Corporal Wren that a visiting head of state asked, specifically, that the door he stood be kept exactly as strict as the night it would not move for him. There is no higher confirmation of a post than that. To have the very man you refused ask that you never be allowed to do otherwise. I carried it to the guardroom that evening. I am not a man given to speeches, and Wren is not a man given to receiving them, so I did it plainly. I told the assembled watch what the record had shown, and what the controller had replied, and then I read them the king's note, the part about keeping the door exactly as strict. I watched the younger men understand something they would carry for the rest of their service, that the hardest order, to stand still, while a powerful man rages and shoves and threatens your career an arm's length from your face, is not a humiliation to be endured but the very thing the post is. That the door does not move is not the guard's weakness. It is his entire strength. And that when a guardsman holds, the house holds with him, not always in the moment, when the storm is loud and a stranger's finger is in your face, but after in the cold light, when the record is read and the reply is written, and the name that is protected turns out to be his. Wren said nothing, of course. He is a corporal of the threshold, saying nothing is most of his trade. But when I finished, he stood and he came to a position of perfect attention that no order had called for, and he held it, eyes forward, until I returned it. That was his speech. It was enough. It was, in fact, the whole of what I had been trying to teach for 11 years, given back to me in a single still figure who understood it better than I could say it. Later, when the watch had gone to their bunks and only the night men remained, the youngest of them, a boy not 3 months on the wall, asked me the question I have been asked in some form by every recruit who ever held a hard post. He asked it quietly, the way men ask the things that frighten them. How do you stand there, he wanted to know, with a powerful man's hand on your chest and his threat in your ear, and not answer? How do you let yourself look, to everyone watching, like a man too slow or too cowed to defend himself, when one word, one motion, would set it right? I gave him the only true answer I have. You do not let yourself look like anything, I said. You stop caring how it looks. That is the whole discipline, and it is harder than any drill. A man who answers the shove has surrendered the post to the man who shoved him. He has agreed that the door is about the two of them, about pride and reaction, when the door is about neither. The corporal who stands and does not answer is not the weak man in that picture. He is the only one in it who has not been moved. The aide spent his pride like water trying to make my corporal flinch and went home with nothing. Wren spent nothing, flinched at nothing, and a king wrote a note about him. That is the arithmetic of the threshold, and it never changes. The man who needs the reaction is always the one who loses, and the man who needs nothing is the one the house remembers. Hold the post, and let the record and the chain and the long memory of the door do the answering. They are slower than your temper. They are also right, and they do not forget. The boy thought about that a long while, and then he straightened where he stood, a little without being told. I did not say anything. You do not need to. The post teaches itself, once a man has seen it done. He is on the threshold tonight as I write this. The sovereign's door is behind him, the law carved into its stone exactly as strict as a foreign king asked it be kept. If a motorcade swept through the gates this minute and a stranger's man pointed at my corporal and said move him, Wren would not move, and I would come down the steps at a measured pace, and we would do the whole of it again, the same way, and we would be right the same way, because the door does not belong to whoever wants it most. It belongs to the sequence, and the sequence belongs to the house, and the house, quietly in the cold light, after the shouting is done, backs the man who holds it. That is the thing the aide never understood, and the king understood at a glance, and my corporal has understood from the first day he drew the post. The strongest man at the door is not the one who can push it open. It is the one who will not be pushed off it. He stands so that the door means something. And a door that means something is the only thing in this whole loud world that a stranger, however powerful, however certain, however close he leans, simply cannot move.